Giga Wrecker is a Metrovania puzzle platformer. It's definitely one of those one-off ideas from Game Freak with a surprisingly stylized art direction. Yeah, that Game Freak known for the Pokemon games, and given its total number of views on Steam, it kinda implies that it's definitely a niche and probably not so great game. Still, I'm frankly surprised that it only has about 718 reviews on Steam, and that's the highest amount and most rated out of all of them. I didn't hear many people really talk about this game after all these years after release, and I wanted to make this video as an almost 10-year following after its initial early access release on August 18th, 2016. Also, it's because I'm interested in Beast of Reincarnation, Game Freak's upcoming game. Anyhow, I actually bought this game way back, actually a day after it was available in early access, and only played it recently as well. My backlog of games is huge. Like many others, I saw who it was from back in the day and figured, well, 15 bucks? Okay, sure. Played it like twice for an hour or so and didn't feel like playing anymore. But this time's different. I completed practically everything in the game in around 14 or so hours, with some help for a few puzzles, as I'd likely be stuck due to the game's lack of in-game hints. Sometimes I like playing games that aren't the greatest to see what else the developer might be doing, and well, it's not bad, and yet really, not that great at the same time. Bear in mind, this game is made by roughly 20 people, likely with a small budget, and only released 7 months after its early access period. It also depends on your acceptance towards unfinished or not so realized elements. It has a really poor English translation, an uninteresting story with uninspired characters, and pretty much a lack of presentation elements besides the puzzle gameplay itself. Giga Wrecker has great and interesting ideas that aren't well realized, which is a shame. It lingers being a halfway idea of a game that doesn't really do much to differentiate itself, as it definitely feels like something cobbled together without much polish. Well, at least for the original PC version of the game, given that there's the updated Giga Wrecker Alt, which is the console-only updated version of the game released in 2019. In any case, this video is really for those curious enough about a title that's not exactly the greatest, as I wouldn't consider it a hidden gem or anything like that, yet are curious enough to delve into a truly niche experience. The tagline of the game is the one and only debris action. Fair enough, I guess, but I would hardly consider this game a Metroidvania. Yeah, there are elements of unlocking new abilities and utilizing them to solve puzzles, but it's one per area. It is also done in a way in which the first half of the game is a linear experience, without much of the going around different areas to test your tools. You're effectively locked to the story progression associated with the area until you complete it. This is noted through the area's nodes that open the doors to the boss fight that completes this segment of the game, or as an optional puzzle room for a customization option for your tools. Giga Wrecker hardly places any incentive to go back and utilize new tools, as most things can actually be done at the same time you enter its 3 major areas, and it's only really used for purely optional stuff. The only real Metroidvania elements are in the second half, in which you can choose between the later ends of the same locations in which there are no new abilities. It's simply picking which one first. It's kinda like classic Mega Man if anything. Defeat the upgraded version of each area's boss to reach the final area of the game. That requires 6 puzzles with 6 locks, which the game closes in with the final boss. Oh right, and the skill tree, so not exactly amazing there either. The tree is split up to quarter HP nodes, empty nodes that serve as progression towards others, and some abilities that are tied to passive skills or functionality stuff like passive HP restoration, length of your debris attacks, and slight gimmicks to your other tools. It's fine I guess, but it never felt impactful to how I engaged with the game other than more HP giving me more leeway for mistakes. You gain EXP by defeating enemies and hitting blue nodes and structures. You can endlessly farm these by the way by resetting areas, and it's easy to max out the skill tree by the end of the game if you've done all the available content. So I have to point out foremost how incredibly jank this game is, which no doubt if you read a few reviews, you'll be immediately informed of. So, at least in my opinion, a puzzle game, especially if it's based on sandbox elements particularly for self-contained or room instance scenarios or set solutions, really should operate based on yes or no logic. That is, manipulating stuff on the map should have clear-cut and understandable relations to other elements in its metaphorical playground, and well, what you have here is a maybe. Puzzles can and will unexpectedly fail for no discernible reason, as structures won't move as you would expect them to. So sometimes, you don't have the right idea of how you're supposed to solve something, and it's more so of understanding how the developer rationalizes the puzzle, more so than presenting the idea itself, if that makes sense. The game doesn't explain anything related to how its physics or how the properties of your tools work. You can solve the puzzles in unintentional ways too. While I quite like when developers are hands-off and let the players figure out things on their own, well, this game's design and presentation of those ideas doesn't really have the nuance geared towards it. There's a reason why resetting levels is a key component of the game, and it's a questionable sort of try until you succeed due to its RNG nature at times. They tried to integrate this resetting nature as also part of the story to make it more acceptable, but it's not great. So in terms of story, you play as Reika Rekeji, a silly enough transliteration from English to Japanese, playing on the title of the game, who finds herself surviving in Japan in 2030 amidst a war between the remnants of humanity and these strange robots that seemingly appeared out of nowhere. These robots are enslaving humanity for the purpose of extracting their labor and resources so that they may proliferate. You later learn that they are from the future, and that it follows Terminator levels of the past and future affecting each other. So you start out playing as Amane Azuma, a girl from the future timeline who sneaks into the past alongside these time-traveling robots, so she can eliminate the protagonist. Spoilers, as I don't think really anyone cares enough to be invested, but Reika is actually the future leader of these robots. If anything, you'll notice how many tropes they mash together in making this game's story. So in the not so distant future, humanity is being wiped out by the MM88 virus or something like that. So Amane's father and some other person had ideas of transferring the human consciousness into robotic forms, which gained immense popularity. Unfortunately, this is a grave mistake as the process slowly erodes the human mind, and so they become vicious, directive-driven, and morally apathetic beings hell-bent on exploiting humanity or something. Their leader, the future protagonist who has a messiah complex, is finding a way to stop the radio noise or the robotic desires from taking over, and is creating a body able to stop the robotification process. The other reason for invading the past is to find and brain control the current Reika, as they imply a butterfly effect that influencing the past will likely smooth out the transition process of changing humanity to robots. Does this even make a lick of sense? I don't know, but this is the most you'll ever hear someone explain the plot of this game. The poor translation especially isn't helping. Overall, there are hardly any interesting ways of actually expressing character expressions or interactions here, other than dialogue boxes and a rare difference for character portraits. But since the story is exclusively done through text, this is rather awkward at points where it cannot reasonably sell emotional or tense moments. It also tends to over-explain the scenario, as it has a surprising amount of text that ruins any storytelling techniques they're going for. And it's doubly awkward when they hire voice talent only for them to play minor one-liners for various characters in the game. There could have been so much more to the experience, but oh well. Also, there are some dialogue triggers based on the room, so if you die in the same room, you have to repeat it again. You'd think they'd account for it, but it's whatever. You can save after the lines, but it's little things like that that add up. But yeah, Amane wants to kill Reika so her impact in the future doesn't happen. She misses her vitals and also blows off her arm as she's interrupted. As Reika is dying, Kotaro Kazuki, a mad scientist sort, asks her if she wants to live. That's how you get the gimmick of being a cyborg, half human and half machine with the ability to manipulate debris, or nanomachines associated with future robot technology. So after a few tutorials in the hub section of the world, you gain the unlock ability to make a cube, and the game is divided into 3 key areas. There's the arsenal, the laboratory, and the mines. In that order, that implies the manufacturing aspect of the robots that maintain their forces in this world. Each of these areas is protected by an Astra, or human beings that are turned into robots that serve as boss encounters to end each area. They're very much the classic Mega Man style boss encounters of responding to patterns that leaves little wiggle room for player expression. Real old school stuff. So as you may have noticed by now, the animation work and overall sort of in-game graphics design is pretty rough overall aside from the puzzle jank. It feels like I'm playing a Flash game given how some elements simply look and feel unfinished. The filter put across the screen is somewhat distracting, and while it does provide a bit of depth compared to the flatness of the various elements that make up the overall image, it is somewhat annoying. Also, this game doesn't have any lighting systems from what I can see, so if it looks a bit flat, well, it kinda is. Also, the pixelized haziness from how character models, proportions, and overall rendering makes character models and elements pretty hard to spot, especially when they zoom out. If you take more modern experiences of how Metrovania or 2D action games are created, the controlled character's profile is very discernible even amidst everything else. There are also hardly any unique environmental markers or assets to make areas stand out. It's the same sort of overall assets with different colors, which the main differences come from the background art. Area traversal is also really weird. So unlike other Metrovanias or 2D games nowadays that take the physical form of area that reflects to how the player actually moves across it, you simply have approximate elevators that take you between areas. I'll call this the Kirby area effect, as you simply enter a doorway and boom, you're at the next map. You don't really get a sense of where it's what by Giga Wrecker's environmental design, as level design is wholly based on the constraints required for its puzzle emphasis, and everything else is kinda an afterthought or half-baked at best. There aren't really any presentation tricks here either, as there basically aren't any minigames or interesting elements aside from these signposts with a bit of lore, or where the camera pans out to emphasize something. But speaking of movement itself, the feeling of movement in this game is not great by any means. So it appears, at least animation wise, there is zero animation between the transition from standing still to moving or running, as it's 0 to 100. This makes it hard to determine if you've built up enough momentum for jumping. But this game isn't exactly a hardcore platformer or anything, so like many things in the game, it works, but isn't exactly refined. The most annoying issue I had is when you try to move, sometimes you'll lose the ability to jump as the structure you're standing on will make you lose your footing, as it approximates whether or not it's flat enough. So you can miss jumps just because the detection system says nah. Or even worse is when you beat up robot enemies and trying to land or jump off of their randomly scattered non-absorbable materials will lead to Reika sliding off, which was rather frustrating to redo the whole puzzle again. It can also ruin puzzles with materials blocking vital points of the puzzle design. Overall, there's an uncanny valley feeling to the whole experience, also due to its varying levels of quality. But also, speaking of old school game design, there's stuff like spikes and holes in the ground that lead to instant game overs. It's part of the reason why the purple reset states exist for the first half of the game, because the developer understands that things may not simply work. So each area is kind of thematic with what sorts of puzzles it may contain, but overall, the scope and complexity doesn't really change too much in my opinion. They're fairly straightforward for the most part, with each area aside from the final one granting you a new ability. Each subsequent new zone does slightly increase in complexity, but I would say most of them are rather short, from a minute to about 10 or so for its 97 rooms or so that doesn't account for boss rooms. Interestingly, the 3 major areas have exactly 28 rooms each, so they went for a consistent approach of filling the game equally with as much content. Overall, the scope didn't really make a difference, as it's more so of how jank the puzzles are, the more places it can go wrong. So later puzzles simply took much longer as something went wrong in the process. Anyhow, I'll be noting stuff about both halves of the experience at the same time. So the first real area of the game, Arsenal, is alright I guess. It's more so an extended tutorial of the game's interactions and how to use the physics system. Reika obtains the debris blade here, and you got wires on platforms and saw blades. The other thing is the free-flowing rubber that makes bouncing debris balls. The thing is, of course, is that once this stuff has been introduced, you can expect any mixture of it for subsequent puzzles and regions. It really seems random on what sorts of puzzles you can expect. The second half's puzzles are a bit harder as I mentioned, but I found Arsenals to be the easiest of all the 3 areas. I went with the same route as the story's initial half with Arsenal, Laboratory, and then Mines again. In the room before the second version of the boss, the puzzle somehow had the bottom switch permanently activated for some odd reason, and well, I won't say no to helpful bugs. The boss in the area is what you can expect from an introductory encounter. I like the game design trick of introducing boss actions prior with that one enemy that you're supposed to time a clash to interrupt them. Although it barely shows up overall, it still stuck out as a cool little thing. So all the bosses in the game cannot be harmed, unless you have the second or largest debris ball size when at the last bits of their health, as it's the design style of responding to patterns to collect a bit of their scrap. Simply hit her blade at the right time and hit it again to collect its scrap. In the second encounter, the fireballs are more plentiful, and the major gimmick is that after knocking away one of her swords, you gotta hit it again mid-air as it explodes when contacting the floor. I have to note I was doing it the wrong way, as trying to hit it perpendicular is a fool's errand, as you can simply hit upward towards it instead. Oh well, it took me a bit longer than I liked, as the issue is that the contact of the explosion may hit you first before your attack hitbox connects. That, and the hitbox of your attack differs based on the size of the debris ball and whatever upgrades you have. Somehow, I did it though. The worst element I think they could have improved are the transitions after you defeat a boss, as Reika simply monologues, "I did a thing" as she escapes or whatever as she returns back to the city area. But wait, a surprise! After returning, there's another boss fight against a heavily modified Astra version of Amane, as she got captured at the beginning of the game. It's pretty cool actually, as this is actually my favorite boss fight. You have to react to various scenarios real quick as she suspends objects and will hurl them at you. In terms of visual and conceptual design, this is easily the best encounter in my opinion. But unfortunately, the game doesn't really throw any more curveballs at you after this point, as it becomes fairly predictable onwards. You get some device from her that allows you to turn back time, which is used for each and every one of the initial 3 boss encounters, by the way, for story reasons. The device and its association to the mad scientist makes it easy to explain things every time because he's a genius, clearly. Since you didn't learn anything at the arsenal, Reika decides to get answers at the laboratory. So there, Reika is contacted by this scientist type person who claims to be a student or assistant to Kozuki at the research lab. It's a ruse, as this person actually is the Astra here, who's genuinely a mad scientist sort that loves dissecting others to see how they work. So by setting up some radio jammer, which coincidentally is an ability only she knows, she interferes with the professor's ability to communicate with you. After reaching a certain point, that's revealed to Reika, who's boiling over in rage after being deceived. You get the debris javelin here, which is pretty cool for its ability to stick into walls so you can use it as a platform. The other gimmicks here are the lasers and black holes because science. So you can activate the lasers by using your recall ability that's normally assigned to picking up debris. And the timing component is an aspect later on to the experience to make it slightly more interesting. As for the black holes, they can hold your lock or suspended structures after they fall. I didn't mention it earlier, but an annoying element is that the debris bits themselves are somewhat inconsistent, as they can fly away or get stuck in structures. Sometimes I had to restart puzzles due to not having enough chunks, and this became more apparent here and in the mine area of the game, especially in the later halves. This boss is probably no one's favorite. Basically, evade all the AoE attacks as you try to beat up the dolls to collect enough debris as you maneuver around the many platforms to evade their attacks. There really is nothing notable about this boss in its first form, as she gives you ample time to beat up the minions due to how infrequent her attacks are with extremely basic patterns. The second form is a bit harder as there's a lot less time to collect enough scrap before you can interrupt her as she casts the map-wide AoE. I didn't really know that she had the same attack for the first encounter, as that's how trivial the boss fight was. Anyhow, I was thinking, it only does 2 ticks of damage. I can passively reheal that by the time it occurs again. So I took my sweet old time waiting it out, as I only had to be the slightest bit careful not to get hit by the doll's attacks. The bosses, besides the final one, all take the idea of 3 damage instances and they're done, but complicates this by how often and how much debris you get as their main gimmick. Anyhow, another boss is defeated, and somehow Amane gets captured by this Astra in this timeline after you saved her, and she decides to end herself to not become a hostage. Timeline reversion and onwards to the mines. The mines have my favorite puzzles in the game, which are the ones that include noxious poison gas or gas physics and gears. You get the debris drill in this area that introduces the idea of removing specific layers or overhanging elements, some of which includes later time-based puzzles, which you guessed it, can have issues based on physics. I should also mention that enemies in this game, aside from bosses, are essentially for their puzzle aspect as well. They don't really do anything interesting, and now that I think about it, there are no mini-boss style encounters as well. So, since I mentioned dialogue triggers at certain rooms, they also have Amane speaking to Reika and the Astras communicating to each other. Someone must have lost the plot, as in the second halves, the bosses comment that the boss you just defeated is dead. But in the second half, you spare all the bosses and the ending visual even shows humanity and robots, specifically these Astras, working together. So yeah, they ain't dead. Anyhow, this boss is actually a double one, with the giant mechanical worm actually being her pet cat in her human time, as future Reika felt bad for her or something. She's a second gen Astra, or one purely produced by other Astras, and somehow that means she's free from the radio noise that affects the first generation ones, which are the other 2 which she considers her sisters, and the future Reika as her mother. Her attacks are rolling fireballs, which later produce linear falling ones, and falling stalagmites. And to do damage to her, you must hit all 3 blue energy sections of the worm, so 9 hits essentially compared to the 3 of the other ones. The gimmick here is the energy ball she absorbs to unleash the map-wide beam attack. I didn't know how this mechanic worked until the end of the game, but apparently you're supposed to stand still while absorbing it. Otherwise, moving while absorbing it will lead to inconsistent behavior and likely cause you to get blasted. So the idea is to avoid the stalagmites and absorb it in the downtime in between. The second half will have her firing faster fireballs, more stalagmites overall, and she will shoot you with laser attacks to stop you from absorbing the black hole. After the battle with this boss, the future Reika finds the current one, and she's planning to brainwash her or whatever. Reika here decides to kill herself, which is strange how this comes up twice, but okay. She gives Amane the time machine so she can travel back in time, and you have a short intermission in which you can now play as her again. Also, I just noticed how much she resembles modern Pokemon character design. So it's just a few platforming segments as she rationalizes what to do given how nothing they've done so far has worked. And now somehow the device has the ability to reset the state of the world or whatever. And that's exactly what is required to make the giant rocks disappear that open up the second half of each map. You meet up again with Reika, and somehow her arm is missing even though clearly Amane doesn't shoot her this time and she gives Reika the time travel machine. Somehow, Reika remembers all the experiences up to this point and sets out to defeat the leader. So she also realizes how pointless it is to kill the Astras given that they are humans too and simply wants to end the war. Anyhow, that's when you go to all the second halves of the areas to find her sub-generators, which at this point I got no explanation of what that means in context of why or how that's needed to reach their headquarters, as it just seems like a video game thing. Afterwards is the final area of the game, and well, it's of a similar difficulty as the second half of the 3 main areas. It also has a room that's not recorded on the map for whatever reason. There's no clear indication whether or not, at least to me, that this was supposed to be a final area in terms of difficulty, as it really is more of the same. I thought some of the puzzles here are pretty neat, but now they do have 2-step puzzles in one for some of it, while also ramping up the platforming aspects of it a little more now. There's this one section that actually makes you consider your jump height based on a light or heavy press, which is actually the first and only time mechanical inputs seem to be intentionally utilized. Otherwise, it's simply just alright. 6 switches for a final puzzle that leads to the teleportation pad for the final boss. I was a bit peeved at this puzzle honestly due to the RNG factors that could cause it to go wrong for no reason, as I took nearly 20 minutes for this one. But it shows off actually most of the aspects of its puzzle design across its 3 key areas interestingly, which I just noticed right now. It has rubber bouncing, lasers, and gas aspects while requiring the use of all 4 of your tools to successfully solve. That seems very end of the game to me at least. The final boss is the completed body version of future Reika, as somehow activating all the sub-generators of the area in the game diverts all the power to this area, which gives her enough energy to complete her mechanical body. Well, alright, sure. So I had a bit of a struggle at first as I had to look up what this boss even does. So just like that end puzzle having elements that encompasses all the other previous areas, this boss is basically just a combination of all the previous boss mechanics. So unlike them, she gets an expanded moveset and requires maximum debris to hit her 1/3 into her HP bar instead of being near the end. She only has one truly unique attack which has her doing the spinning tracking move that changes its property based on whether you're moving or not and takes up a large portion of the screen. Otherwise, she's basically a more difficult version of all the bosses summed up. The only poor design choice in my opinion is that one that's similar to the first boss's middle of the screen sword attack. She can decide between the swing that you can deflect or the version you must jump to avoid. It looks pretty ambiguous to me and not something I can reliably see based off the animation alone. I have to note that what attack she decides can be pretty RNG as I experienced her spamming the same attack over and over as she has a larger moveset to choose from. Overall, not too bad once I got used to it and was decently fun. And that's the end of the game. The idea is that of hope that this time, perhaps humanity will be able to do something about the impending meteorite that brings disease instead of being forced down the robotic path. The credits list is pretty short and there's a bit more content at the end of the game with the boss rush. Yeah, no thanks, I'm satisfied with the ending of the game here. Well, that was Giga Wrecker, and honestly, if they have polished it a bit more and fleshed out more of the game, frankly I think it could have been a hit. It has a lot of elements that almost have the sparks of a good game, but didn't really seem to be all quite there. Game Freak seems to have trouble finding their footing outside of Pokemon with their other releases, so I'm more than curious on what Beast of Reincarnation will play like as it's part action and turn-based. It's a game about Emma, a young woman who's also in a post-apocalyptic Japan who wields special powers that alienates her, and she's also fighting robots too, but not only them, with her pet dog. But I'm particularly keen on what it's going to be like on PC though, as well. Most of the big AAA Japanese developers I've seen kinda struggled with their first serious PC ports. This is especially since they're going for what appears to be modern feature sets and visuals on Unreal Engine 5 for today's market. It's coming out fairly soon in early August. I'm hoping they can pull it off as this is their first AAA project that isn't Pokemon. But that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching, and I'd appreciate it if you liked, comment, and subscribed. See you in the next one.